Mr. Speaker, I rise in the footsteps of Dr. Kenny Anthony, Stephenson King, Sir John Compton, George Charles, Ralph Gonzalez, Keith Rowley, Ian R. Robinson, Lyndon Pindin, Dr. Denzel Douglas, P.J. Patterson, Michael Manley, Edward Siaga, Ver Bud, Errol Barrow, Tom Adams, Grantley Adams, Mia Motley. All these prime ministers have represented their constituencies for 25 years and over. I'm proud and humbled to be given the opportunity to represent the people of Castries East. It is my singular honor, and I thank them for having the trust and confidence in me. I can assure you that we will continue working together for the benefit of all. Mr. Speaker, we have come to the end of this government. This is its fifth and final budget before the people of St. Lucia serve judgment on the mismanagement of the country. The 4 years have ended. Indeed, the 4 years were not 40 years. And the Prime Minister, in his speech, clearly showed that he and the government are in panic mode. Yes, Mr. Prime Minister, leadership is important. Leadership that can be trusted. The glossy renderings will not work. The promises over the years have not been realized. St. Jude remains unfinished. VAT is still very much in place. No bananas have been shipped to France. The 6 or 7 hotels, depending on which budget address is referred to, were never going to happen. The $2 billion worth of foreign investment has vanished. It was never true. Visa-free access to the United States is now a sick joke. The hidden fuel tax of $6.80 has been debunked by the Prime Minister himself. The Hiwanora Airport is still not redeveloped. And there are no new ports in Castries or Vieux-Fort, and the marinas have not materialized. Then came the unfortunate COVID pandemic, an opportunity for the Prime Minister to demonstrate empathy, to work with the country. Instead, the Prime Minister has aligned himself with one of his ministers who has publicly proclaimed that the UWP government only supports those who support the vision and policies of the United Workers' Party government, which was clearly demonstrated by her choice of employment. This statement is the direct opposite of democracy. But not one member of this government has chosen to rebut or rebuke the minister for that statement. Mr. Speaker, what comes to mind is a quotation from Miles K. Davis, and it says, "You can tell a bully from a leader by how they treat people who disagree with them." Say it again, Mr. Speaker. You can tell a bully from a leader by how they treat people who disagree with them. Mr. Speaker, there is a culture of indifference and intolerance in this parliament. A failure to recognize that the people of St. Lucia are under pressure, and there are 2 St. Lucias. There is an intolerance towards opposition, a disdain for the opposition view, a failure to deal with the reality of life in St. Lucia. We cannot continue with the mentality of making opponents cry, of lies and deception, a cancer culture of them against us. Once you are a different opinion, you are ostracized and victimized. The government acts as if they are perfect. They refuse to listen to people who they believe are backing dogs. A self-righteous posture. They are always right. Mr. Speaker, the reality is there are indeed two St. Lucias. There is a new St. Lucia for family, friends, and foreigners, where the privileged friends to the ruling party and the elite live in luxury. They dictate and control. They buy the best lands. They have inside knowledge of the best business deals. In exchange, they fund the party so that votes can be purchased and promises can be made to unsuspecting voters. Then there's the real St. Lucia, made up of ordinary citizens, the public servants, teachers, correctional and police officers, nurses and firemen. They must be grateful to the government for duty-free concessions on vehicles, a facility long enjoyed by investors and employees of businesses that have head offices in St. Lucia. But they are said to be contributing to the economy. But frontline workers are being made to believe they have been granted a favor by the great UWP government. These frontline workers are the people who help us maintain our quality of life. In the real St. Lucia, there are displaced hotel workers, unemployed taxi drivers, farmers, minibus operators, small hotel and guest house owners whose properties remain closed, small and medium-sized business owners whose sales are slow and they cannot pay their employees, and businesses on the verge of collapse in the real St. Lucia. In the real St. Lucia live the unemployed, the entertainers who can no longer perform at the hotels, the single mothers, and unemployed construction workers. Mr. Speaker, these people in the real St. Lucia are the ones expected to make sacrifices, to follow the COVID protocols, and be grateful and thankful to the great leader for crumbs from the table, Mr. Speaker. And if they disobey, there are serious consequences. They are arrested, they are detained, they are beaten, they are fired from their jobs, and the denial of benefits. If they fail to follow the vision of the United Workers' Party to build a new St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, in the real St. Lucia, there are people who cannot pay their rents, landlords who cannot pay their mortgages. There is great uncertainty and fear. In the real St. Lucia, there are pensioners who are in despair. Mr. Speaker, in the real St. Lucia, there is lack of transparency and accountability in this government. The main reason why, Mr. Speaker, for St. Lucia being perceived to be more corrupt based on the Corruption Perception Index, CPI, compiled by Transparency International. The Corruption Perception Index is ranked on a scale of 0 to 100, with 100 representing no corruption and not being very corrupt. So the lower your score, Mr. Speaker, the more corrupt your country. Mr. Speaker, I wish to inform honorable members that the Corruption Perception Index is an international index, and to indicate that it is not something that we on this side have invented. For St. Lucia, it was 71.0 in 2012, 2013, and 2014. It then jumped to 60 in 2016. It then went lower. At that time, it went lower, signifying increased perception of St. Lucia as a corrupt country. In 2017, it was 55. In 2017, 2018, and 2019. It went slightly up again in 2020 to 56. This shows, Mr. Speaker, that the perception of corruption has increased significantly under the government that is in power now, Mr. Speaker. That is why a St. Lucia Labour Party government will strengthen the Integrity Commission to ensure that no politician is above the law. Mr. Speaker, the St. Lucian poet John Robert Lee has accurately described the situation in St. Lucia today. And allow me to quote, Mr. Speaker. John Robert Lee said, For many, St. Lucia is not a nation state. It is real estate, plantation estate. To them, the citizens are former slaves, servants, workers, employees of hotels and shops and stores and supermarkets. People to be easily dismissed, ignored, who have few rights, if any, of little importance, except as votes to be bought for every 5 years. Those who hold financial and other power are openly contemptuous of the average citizen. Does a country get the government it deserves? How do citizens arrive at a mature thinking consciousness that makes them choose leaders and government that truly care about the basic needs of the people? What does it mean to be a nation state? Not some planter's estate, not some piece of real estate to be bought and sold by rich land speculators with no thought of the citizens who occupy the land that is their birthright. The world and these small islands are collapsing rapidly into authoritarianism, anarchy, crime, open corruption, ruled by lawless supremacists of various tribes. One obvious solution by political, financial, and other powers will be rule by police and military force, states of emergency, overthrow of constitutional rights, suppression of citizens' rights, election rigging or blatant election theft, arrest of any persons or persons who seem as offering opposition to the dictatorship called operatives. Anyone, regardless of political affiliation.
Honourable Member.
Mr. Speaker, I do wish to ask through you whether the Honourable Member is still quoting, and if so, exactly what is he quoting from, the publication and the date. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It is a point of order. I wish to know, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member, since you didn't say on quote, I took it that you were still quoting.
Thank you.
Just one quick, I would have asked anyway in the end. You said that you're quoting Robert Lee?
From John Robert Lee, Mr. Speaker. It's a publication on Facebook.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of your solutions by political, financial, and other powers will be ruled by police and military force.
Honourable Member.
States of...
One more second.
The date is also relevant, Mr. Speaker. The date is also relevant. If we can please indicate that to us, Mr. Speaker.
Are you quoting from his Facebook page?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. And I have his permission to do so.
Okay. Continue.
One of your solutions by political, financial, and other powers will be ruled by police.
Did we get the date, Mr. Speaker? I didn't hear.
No, he's quoting from his Facebook page.
The date is important, Mr. Speaker. The date is very relevant.
Not necessarily.
The date of the posting.
Yes.
No, that is relevant, Mr. Speaker. If you're quoting here and you're referring to the St. Lucian situation today, and you're quoting from what... We need to know when it is that this... The date is relevant, Mr. Speaker. It is very relevant. Why doesn't he want to share the date of the publication?
No, honourable members. Honorable members, honorable members, honorable members. If he's simply quoting what somebody else said, it is not relevant as to you could deal with that.
Mr. Speaker, if you go on Mr. Robert Lee's Facebook page today, now you'll see it.
Yeah.
The world and these small islands are collapsing rapidly under anarchy, crime, open corruption, ruled by lawless supremacists of various tribes. One obvious solution by political, financial, and other powers will be rule by police and military force, states of emergency, overthrow constitutional rights, suppression of citizens' rights, election rigging or blatant election theft, arrest of any person or persons seen to be offering opposition to the dictatorship. They are called operatives. Anyone, regardless of political affiliation or no political affiliation, the world, this Caribbean, this nation state is at a brink. And so many are asleep, given over to partisanship, fetting, refusal to obey health protocols, lack of personal self-discipline, no regard for moral and ethical standards, lack of serious thinking. So, the dictators and the accomplice deceivers, waving trinkets, bread scraps, and circuses, seduce the careless and headless people with little efforts. And the people fight each other to the death with gun, cutlass, fire, various cruelties, killing of homeless, killing of dogs, rape, as the autocrats enjoy the show from the comfortable resorts. The land, the people, the light. A state, not real estate, not plantation estates. Mr. Speaker, the words of the great St. Lucian poet, John Robert Lee. Mr. Speaker, we all agree that COVID affected St. Lucia and the world. In March, Mr. Speaker, the COVID pandemic hit St. Lucia. It caused disruption in all areas of economic and social activity. Lives and livelihoods were affected, and government and people had to make drastic adjustments. The government of St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker, did not cause the pandemic, but they managed several aspects of the but they mismanaged several aspects of the response because of their propensity to play politics and to imply improper motives to anyone who opposes them. Mr. Speaker, early on, before the pandemic had reached such alarming proportions, I advised the government that we were ill-prepared for the rampage that COVID would cause. At the time, the Prime Minister was still speaking of Rat Island as a quarantine center. We had not begun testing. We had not begun testing on any large scale. Instead of heeding my advice, the government and its surrogates unleashed personal attacks on me and the SLP. And up to this day, they are in denial, Mr. Speaker, speaking about a march that was authorized by the Ministry of Health, saying that this march is the cause for the 64 deaths from the COVID pandemic, Mr. Speaker. Today, Mr. Speaker, St. Lucia has the infamous reputation of having to date the most deaths from COVID and the most infections in the OECS. St. Lucia has had more people who died from COVID than Barbados and the entire OECS. That's nothing to be proud of. It's nothing to be proud of, Mr. Speaker. And we sympathize with the relatives of the deceased. However, the government prefers to play games, to play with words, blame the opposition, instead of finding ways of reducing the fatalities. That is typical UDAP government. They refuse to take responsibility. Mr. Speaker, we repeat that government should not relax on measures to control the pandemic and scream success for political purposes. There are now several new variants of the pandemic. We should not lure the population into a false sense of security. The battle for COVID is far from over. We urge the public to obey the protocols and get vaccinated. However, the government must be more empathetic. We must understand that people are frustrated. We should speak to them, not arrest them. They are in need of food. Their despair is growing. We cannot relax. When someone commits suicide at the hospital, when they are in isolation, Mr. Speaker, that is a life. A family has lost a loved one. I came and I spoke about the situation at the isolation wards at the Victoria Hospital, Mr. Speaker. No one took me on. As usual, they laughed. They abused me. They laughed. They said that I didn't know what I was speaking. Mr. Speaker, now, someone has committed suicide because of the isolation, Mr. Speaker. I came in this honorable house and I said to members, isolation cannot be easy. Make the best arrangements for people when they are in isolation. I was hearing stories of the situation in isolation, Mr. Speaker. Instead of listening to me, they laughed. They laughed. They ridiculed me, Mr. Speaker. They attacked me. Now, what has happened? Some unfortunate person has lost their life, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we cannot relax. We need to have conversations. We need to talk to people and not threaten them. The COVID situation is real, Mr. Speaker. It's a real situation. And we have not yet crossed the threshold. Mr. Speaker, I turn now to the management of the economy, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Minister for Finance continues to boast of being a great manager of the economy. They are workers. They say they are workers. They promise money in the pockets of St. Lucians. But the reality is, the promises have not been fulfilled. And the economy has been underperforming from 2019, both in terms of growth and revenue. Contrary to the pronouncements of the Minister of Finance, that the economy will experience, or is experiencing in 2019, 4% growth. The fact is, and if you look at page 92 and 93 of the Social Economic Review, you will see that even after rebasing, the economy contracted by 0.1% in the year 2019. We can't blame it on COVID. We cannot blame a contraction in 2019 on COVID, Mr. Speaker. We must blame it on poor economic policies and mismanagement of the economy by this government. Mr. Speaker, the COVID pandemic affected the world, but St. Lucia's economy was impacted in a more severe manner than any economy in the ECCU. We have to ask the question, why did St. Lucia borrow the most but experience the greatest contraction? The answer must be mismanagement and ineffective, misguided policies by the Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, GDP in St. Lucia contracted by 20.4% in 2020, after a further contraction of 0.1% in 2019. Remember, Mr. Speaker, that there was no COVID in 2019. There was no COVID in 2019. Page 9 of the Social and Economic Review illustrates the dismal performance of the St. Lucian economy when compared to the other islands in the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. Mr. Speaker, I refer to page 9 of the Social and Economic Review. Antigua contracted by 18.3% in 2020, but grew by 1.4% in 2019. Dominica contracted by 15.4% in 2020, but grew by 1.5% in 2019. Grenada, thank you. Grenada contracted by 12.6% in 2020, but grew by 0.6% in 2019. St. Kitts contracted by 15.2% in 2020 and contracted by 0.3% in 2019. St. Vincent contracted by 5.5% in 2020 and grew by 0.9% in 2019. St. Lucia contracted by 20.4% in 2020 and contracted by 0.1% in 2019. Mr. Speaker, St. Lucia, under the management of the workers, did worse than all the islands in the ECCU individually and collectively. Yet, we borrowed the most, and we profess to be the best managers, to run the country as a business, to be workers, Mr. Speaker, to have the best leadership. This is the UWP propaganda that would like us to believe that our economy is being well managed. COVID affected the entire region, but our country's economy did worse, Mr. Speaker, under the workers. Mr. Speaker, this was the last budget address delivered by the Minister of Finance. And it's important for us to review his stewardship in terms of economic management, fiscal management, economic growth, and debt accumulation. Mr. Speaker, a decline in government revenue is an indicator of economic performance. Revenue declined in 2019, followed by a sharp decline in revenue in 2020 because of COVID. A prudent manager should examine his expenditure and try to reduce deficits. Mr. Speaker, when revenue decreases, a prudent manager makes adjustments to his expenditure. Government revenue plateaued in 2018 to 2019, but expenditure increased, hence the increase in deficits. Accumulated deficits must be reduced at some point. We cannot continue to work in deficits, Mr. Speaker. This has been the story of many of our Caribbean neighbors that allowed their deficits to balloon, to increase, Mr. Speaker. The answer, IMF-induced structural adjustment programs. Mr. Speaker, there cannot be the excuse that the international community has been generous to the island. Loans were granted, not to St. Lucia alone. The entire region, the entire world got concessionary loans because of COVID. There's nothing special about St. Lucia that they got concessionary loans. The whole world, all the islands. But the question is, what did we do with the money? What did we do with the loans that we got from the international financial institutions? Mr. Speaker, let us examine another measure of fiscal management under the government of workers. Mr. Speaker, let us examine the overall balance, another economic indicator. Mr. Speaker, the overall balance measures the difference between revenue and grants and expenditure and net lending. The overall balance is a more reliable picture of economic management. It differs to the GDP, and it differs to the GDP, debt to GDP ratio, in that it cannot be rebased, or private sector investment cannot be included, as was done in the Social and Economic Review on page 21, where private sector investment was included in the GDP of the country, Mr. Speaker. The overall balance indicates the performance of the economy, how robust the economy is. The overall balance shows, Mr. Speaker, how the country, the fiscal management of the country as it relates to government performance, to government revenue, to government expenditure, with government payment on loans, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, only the data will show that under the management of the United Workers' Party, the overall deficit increased every year from the year 2016. Further, Mr. Speaker, it will show that in the years 2011 to 2016, the overall deficit reduced under the government of the St. Lucia Labour Party and the member for Beaufort South as Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker. The data is clear, and I invite ministers, Mr. Speaker, to show the data. Let us deal with the data. Let's not deal with innuendo and mépris and heckling. The data. Take the paper, take the books, take the economic results, take the social and economic review, and let us deal with the data. And the data will show that under the workers, the overall balance has increased. And right now, is a situation of near panic, Mr. Speaker. That is the performance of the economy, Mr. Speaker. That is how you measure economy, Mr. Speaker. And I defy any member of this side to tell me that the overall balance has not increased under the stewardship of this Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, these large deficits have caused us to increase the level of borrowing. The COVID pandemic exposed the fickle nature of the economic situation in St. Lucia. That's why it exploded to a contraction of 20%, Mr. Speaker, and a debt to GDP ratio of 86%, Mr. Speaker. A situation, the pandemic affected all the islands. It affected all the islands equally. But the data will show that St. Lucia performed the worst. The worst, Mr. Speaker. That's the reality. That under your management, after COVID, the St. Lucian economy performed the worst under the workers after COVID. And before COVID, in 2019, the economy had contracted, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is reasonable to assume that growth in the St. Lucian economy, when it existed, must have been growth because of borrowing. It must have been growth because of borrowing, because most of the public sector projects, the growth was caused by public sector projects, and these public sector projects were financed by government borrowing or taxation. Mr. Speaker, again the data, not talk, the data. Growth, Mr. Speaker, in an economy, in this economy, growth was propelled by borrowing, and the data will show, Mr. Speaker. None of the major projects announced by this government has materialized. None of them. No new hotels because of borrowing. No new hotels, Mr. Speaker. No new hotels have been built prior to 2019. The one prospective hotel, the Range Development, the one prospective hotel, the Range Development, Mr. Speaker, which this government found, Mr. Speaker, they mishandled it, and up to today, the taxpayer has not been told what was the cost of the settlement with the Range Hotel. Up to today, Mr. Speaker, we came here and we warned them. We said to them, do not tamper with the arrangements. No, they are workers. They are workers. The hotel never came, and we had to pay the owners or the promoters of the range development. And up to now, they have not told us how much they've paid, Mr. Speaker. Up to today, they haven't told us, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the data will show that the 7 hotels promised before COVID, the 7 hotels that I outlined on the 29th of January in the historic motion of no confidence in the Minister of Finance, I outlined the 7 hotels that they promised the people of St. Lucia.
Honorable Member, your motion was not in the Minister of Finance.
Excuse me?
The motion was not in the Minister of Finance, so I need you to rephrase it.
Against the member from Microsoft.
It was against the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will yield to your correction. The motion against the Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the 7 hotels, every year, every budget, this government promises hotels. Hotel in Choiseul, hotel in Vieux-Fort. I even think they say they will be in a hotel in Bexar. Hotels everywhere. Every year is a hotel, Mr. Speaker. Every year. Then came the great hotel, the Pearl of the Caribbean. The Pearl of the Caribbean, where we will turn, where we are going to turn Vieux-Fort from a ghetto into the Pearl of the Caribbean. There were supposed to be 800 jobs. 800 jobs. There were supposed to be numerous hotels. Vieux-Fort was supposed to be changed. This government of vision, would have transformed Grosile, would have taken over, would have transformed Vieux-Fort, would have changed the South. No COVID. No COVID. You said so from 2016 to this day, you have not built one hotel room in Vieux-Fort South, Mr. Speaker. To this day, to this very day, Mr. Speaker. What's your excuse? What's the excuse? New hotels have been built in Grenada. New hotels have been built in Dominica. New hotels have been built in Antigua. New hotels have been built in St. Vincent. You have not built one new hotel in St. Lucia from 2016. But you say people have confidence in your government. You are good managers. You this and that. You haven't built one new hotel in St. Lucia. Not one. From 2016, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the promise of all these new hotels, of all these new jobs, of the transformation to the south of the country has not happened, Mr. Speaker. Has not happened. Mr. Speaker, there was a release from the Office of the Prime Minister that spoke about negotiations for a new port in Castries by El Pirata. There'll be a new port in Vieux-Fort. There'll be a new port in Castries. There'll be new marinas. Soufrière would explode. New marinas, new ports, Port Castries, Port Vieux-Fort, Mr. Speaker. Up to this day, before COVID, there's not been not one change in the ports in Castries or the ports in Vieux-Fort, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is why I contend that any growth in the economy was due to government borrowing, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, COVID was the ideal time for the government to adjust, to make adjustments in policy. COVID was the ideal time for the government to pull back and discuss the direction of the economy and the future for the people of St. Lucia, because COVID will be with us for a very long time. Mr. Speaker, I invite you to join me and let us look at one of the government's so-called magnificent infrastructure projects. Magnificent. The less than 2 miles of road in Rodney Bay. Let us examine, Mr. Speaker, the less than 2 miles of road in Rodney Bay with all the roundabouts and land acquisition. Let's examine, Mr. Speaker. Let us examine, Mr. Speaker, although this project has never come to this honorable house, we do not know how much it costs. The taxpayers of the country have never been told how much this project has cost. I came here and I said that there was a gentleman in the Ministry of Infrastructure who went to the press and he said, we chose somebody because they had the money. We chose somebody, and I think it cost about $50 million. So somebody jumped up, and as usual, attacked me on a so-called point of order, Mr. Speaker. But we, up to this day, we have not been told how much that less than 2 miles of road. And my colleagues tell me that is, I mustn't say less than 2 miles. Some say it's just a little more than a mile. But I'm being conservative, and I say less than 2 miles. It is my understanding, based on what was said in the public domain by an official of the Ministry of Infrastructure at the time, that the road costs between $15 and $20 million. Mr. Speaker, I ask you, and I want us to pull back a little. Pull back a little. Let us take out our partisan caps and our partisan beliefs. Let's think back a little. Let us think back a little. Let us think back a little, Mr. Speaker. Let us think back a little, Mr. Speaker. There was no tender for the 2 miles of road. There was no tender, either public or private, for the 2 miles of road. But I can tell you, I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, and I invite you to have a forensic audit. Let us have 2 forensic audits, 2. I'll do one for the Bois d'Orange Bridge. I'll do one for the Angers Road. I'll do one for the bypass road by the Bois d'Orange Bridge. I will do one for St. Jude's Hospital. I will do one for the 2 miles of road you are building in Rodney Bay. I will do one for the road by Vieux-Fort. Let's do I'm open. Let us do forensic audits. Mr. Speaker, I will do one for Labrie. Do your forensic, I'll do one. You do yours, and we do ours. I will do one for the A&M roads. I'll do one. Let's do it. Let us do forensic audits. I'm open, because I can assure honorable members that we will be doing forensic audits when we get back in government in 2020. Mr. Speaker, the urgency, what is the urgency to complete this work? What are the financial arrangements on that road? On what basis were the figures calculated? How much is the drainage component on this road? How much is the road surfacing? What's the cost of the relocation of services? What about the land acquisition, the cost of land acquisition? What about the finance charges and the third-party compensation? Mr. Speaker,
Honorable Member,
there are many other issues, Mr. Speaker. There are many other issues. But I will deal with what the economist calls the opportunity cost. I will deal with what the economist calls the opportunity cost.
Honorable, if the 2 of you would like to continue the discussion, you could just go and do it outside. But allow members to hear the member. Continue, honorable member. Leader of the other position, continue.
Mr. Speaker, what is the urgency? What is the urgency, Mr. Speaker? What was the urgency in these COVID times to build less than 2 miles of road for $20 million? What's the urgency? Who does it benefit? We'll get to the benefits of the people who work there in a while. Why isn't there a tender? Why do you work all night? Why do you change the curfew to work there? Who is benefiting? Why? Ask yourself the question, why, Mr. Speaker? But I will tell you, I will give you the opportunity cost. And the economists will tell you what opportunity cost is. Opportunity cost, in layman's language, is what you could do with that $20 million instead. Mr. Speaker, I want you to bear with me a while. While I outline to you what we could do with that $20 million. How we could make people benefit. How real people could benefit from the use of this $20 million in COVID times. Real people. How will you put people first? Instead of spending $20 million on less than 2 miles of road in this time of COVID. When Thomas in Bexon is looking for a job, when Marianne in Bocage can send her children to school because she has no tablets, we are spending $20 million on less than 2 miles of road. And we move roundabouts here and put roundabouts there. In the time of COVID, Mr. Speaker. Let me tell you what the government of the Labour Party would have done with the fiscal space that $20 million allows. Mr. Speaker, the St. Lucia Labour Party would improve lives, would put people first, and would show caring for the people of St. Lucia. Here is how we would spend the $20 million. Mr. Speaker, we will give food vouchers for deserving families island-wide to a value of $3 million. We will give real bonuses to frontline COVID workers of $1.2 million. We will give fuel vouchers to the fisher folk of $2.2 million. We will give fuel vouchers to minibus operators valued $3 million. We will give income support to farmers who have not been paid by national farmers, $2 million. We will give income support to farmers who are no longer receiving income from the hotels, not because of my colleagues, not his fault, because the hotels are closed because of COVID. We will give them income support. Are spending on 2 miles of road in Rodney Bay. That is how you put people first in government policy, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, contrary, we would use the $20 million to finance the construction. If you want to have one project, we would use the $20 million to finance the construction of affordable housing that would generate hundreds of jobs if you wanted to have one big project. That is how the government of the St. Lucia Labour Party would have spent $20 million in this time of COVID, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, by his own admission, Mr. Speaker, and based on the Prime Minister's statement, Mr. Speaker, I will outline how the Prime Minister, the direct support that was given to the people of St. Lucia after COVID by this government of workers. Mr. Speaker, $7.2 million was given for income support to cover 3 months to people who do not contribute to the NIC. $7.2 million is given to them. $3 million, according to the Prime Minister's budget, was given to eligible households under the Education Assistance Program. $1.26 million given already of disbursements under the blended loans and grant support system to small and medium-sized enterprises. $225,000 was given in electricity support of $75 monthly to consumers. Agricultural produce was given to 1,000 vulnerable households, and 19,000 meals were distributed island-wide. The sum total of the direct government response to COVID as stated in the Prime Minister's budget. Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member.
Yes, sir.
You have 10 minutes in which to complete your presentation.
The Prime Minister's offer doesn't hold?
Yes, Honourable. Yes, Honourable.
Please.
How much time do you need?
1 hour. Hmm? 1 hour. But how about on the point of Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, I beg the suspension of Section 3210 to give the honourable member from Castries East an additional hour. He asked for. I mean, I'm happy to give him the 2 hours.
Well, get me. I will use it. Get me
the extra 2 hours.
Thanks.
Honourable members, the question is that Standing Order 4210 be invoked to grant the Honourable Leader of the Opposition an additional 2 hours in which to complete his presentation. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many as of contrary opinions, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. You have an additional 2 hours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, no figures were made available for the meals or the 1,000 agricultural produce given to vulnerable households. So, Mr. Speaker, I will make an approximation. I will say that the meals, the agricultural produce cost $100 per box. And the meals cost $50 per meal. Is that okay? This means, Mr. Speaker, that in total, Mr. Speaker, the direct support given to the people of St. Lucia because of COVID, the direct support, listen to my words carefully because before I'm misquoted. I'm not talking about the people's money at NIC that you paid them back for 3 months. I'm not talking about it. That was about 60 million. I'm not talking about it. That was their money that you paid them back. And I'm saying to you, when we get into government, we will have to repay the pensioners for that money that was spent, Mr. Speaker. So we're not talking about it. Right. We're talking about the direct government support based on the Honorable Minister of Finance's budget. $9.6 million spent directly on citizens during the COVID pandemic. But, Mr. Speaker, the reality is people are hungry. People are hungry. Not supporters of the Labour Party, not supporters of the United Workers' Party, people generally. And I'm sure when these honourable members remove their biased political caps, they will understand the frustration and the pain that some of their constituents come to them with. All of us do it. All of us feel it. All of us feel that pain when people from our constituencies come to us and say that they want money for medical supplies, for medical support. All of us feel it when people in our constituencies come to us and say that they have 3 children in the house and they can't give them any money, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, I understand. And I will right away withdraw it and even apologize if I'm wrong. I understand, Mr. Speaker, that the government has food vouchers that they are circulating. If I'm wrong, Mr. Speaker, I apologize and I withdraw it immediately. But I want to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that no member on this side has received 1 food voucher from the government to distribute to their constituents. If I am wrong, I apologize. But I understand, Mr. Speaker, that there are candidates, wannabe candidates, who have vouchers that are distributing compliments the government of St. Lucia in constituencies. If I'm wrong, I apologize immediately. Mr. Speaker, all of us feel that strain from our constituents, all of us. The strain of need from our constituents, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, I want, Mr. Speaker, in the real St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker, in the real St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker, this government will spend 9.6 million. Let me recast what I said, Mr. Speaker. Because, Mr. Speaker, there is a dangerous trend in this honorable house to create flashing mirrors, to say things that sound good with no fact. Just say it. You don't back it up, you just say it. Or to just say many things, talk, say a lot of things to confuse people. Let me repeat what I said. I said that in terms of direct government support based on the Prime Minister's budget and based on my own calculations for the 1,000 agriculture packages that were distributed and the 19,000 meals plus the $7.2 million of income support for 3 months at $500 each, plus the $1.2 million in the National Development Bank, direct government support was only $9.6 million to the people of St. Lucia. And I also said, Mr. Speaker, that I understand, and if I'm wrong, I stand corrected, I will withdraw, and I'll apologize immediately. Mr. Speaker, I'm a man. I can say when I'm wrong. I can admit I'm not infallible. If I make a mistake, I made a mistake. If I make a mistake, say I made a mistake. I understand that the government is distributing vouchers, food vouchers, to people in this country. And no member of the opposition has received one food voucher. That's all I'm saying. Mr. Speaker, all of us are suffering from the pain. All of us, Mr. Speaker, every one of us is suffering. Our constituents are suffering. Our constituents are suffering from the pain of COVID, the pain of hunger, the pain of hungry children, not having free meals. All of our constituents, not UWP or not Labour. So I see no reason why we have to be arguing and attacking each other and for this. All of our constituents. You didn't cause COVID, but our people are hungry. Let us share the spoils. Let us put people first. Let's put all the people first, Mr. Speaker. Not only people who support the United Workers' Party. Not only give people who you want to win seats. Give them contracts. All of us, all of our people are suffering, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to quote the words.
Honourable Member.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, I think the Honourable Member is very selective and misleading with regards to the total assistance given to the country, Mr. Speaker. Only in my contribution on, what date was Wednesday, Mr. Speaker, I did indicate that the government had provided an additional $5 subsidy on the cost of flour, in addition to, which was to assist the bakers, which was enjoyed by the entire population, Mr. Speaker. In addition to that, Mr. Speaker, we also provided, as I said, Mr. Speaker, 2,000 bags of rice, flour, and sugar to Nemo, which was distributed throughout the island. And this is just one example, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure there are other cases as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I note that the member for Choiseul is a real politician. Thank you very much, member for Choiseul. What I was quoting from was the budget address of the Honorable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, in the words of President Obama, cut loose the shackles of the past and pivot towards a policy of engagement. Let this government cut the shackles, cut the partisanship, cut the victimization, cut the cancer culture. Cut it. Cut it, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member from Beaufort Shove showed clearly how CDB money was expensed, Mr. Speaker. He showed clearly. He showed it clearly, Mr. Speaker. Cut it. Cut the shackles. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. The issue, let me come to the issue of debt, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the government has borrowed extensively, and extensively long before COVID. When the Minister of Finance took office in June 2016, our debt to GDP ratio, when the Minister of Finance took office in June 2016, our debt to GDP ratio was 61.5%, or $3.07 billion before rebasing. In 2020, the debt to GDP ratio is 86.5%, or in terms of money, $3.7 billion after 2 rounds of rebasing. At the end of 2019, the debt to GDP ratio was 60%, or $3.41 billion after rebasing. In 2016, the debt to GDP, the debt of the country was $3.07 billion. The data. The data. I'll say it again. Say it again. When the Minister of Finance took office in June 2016, our debt to GDP ratio was 61.5%, or $3.07 billion before rebasing. In 2020, after COVID, the debt to GDP ratio is 86.5%, or $3.7 billion after 2 rounds of rebasing. At the end of 2019, the debt to GDP ratio was 60%, or 59.5%. Yes. Yeah. I was going through the nearest thing. You wanted 59.5? 9.5. The debt was 60%. He wants to take it to the nearest thing, 59.5%, or $3.4 billion. In 2016, it was $3.07 billion. After rebasing, there was no rebasing in 2016. Mr. Speaker, let us examine the total loan disbursements for the year 2011 to 2016 and for the year 2016 to 2020. Mr. Speaker, lest I be misunderstood or misquoted, I am talking about the volume of loans that were disbursed, not the balance. Not the balance. Not the balance. I'm talking about the volume of money that was disbursed, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there is a difference of $2 billion between the years 2011 and 2016 and 2016 and 2020 in terms of loans disbursed. Disbursed. Not the balance, disbursed. Mr. Speaker, it is clear that this Minister of Finance has borrowed extensively, even before COVID, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the new government will inherit debt payments. Every dollar, 27 cents will have to be incurred by taxpayers for debt payments. Every dollar. And 30 cents of every dollar of tax revenue will have to be paid in debt, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we can't be proud of that. We can't boast because we can borrow more. We're not the ones who are going to be paying for that debt. We're not the ones. Our children, Mr. Speaker, will be paying for that. And not, Mr. Speaker, you see, I did not say that this government, I said 27 cents of every dollar will be used for debt repayment. I never said government. And 30 cents of every tax dollar in revenue will be used to pay debt. That is what they have to deal with, and that's what we have to deal with when we get into government. That's a fact. Mr. Speaker, there's another vexing factor. The outstanding payables, Mr. Speaker. The outstanding payables, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and in the calculation of debt, we must include outstanding payables, and we must include the direct finance contracts, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there is a belief that the direct finance contracts must not come into being. No. I invite you, Mr. Speaker, I invite you to look at the expenses in the Ministry of Infrastructure, both when we were there and when they are there now. And you will see most of the money, or I want to come back and say it differently. A great level, a great proportion of the disbursements to the Ministry of Infrastructure is to pay DFC payments. We had it, and they have it also. So, Mr. Speaker, design finance contracts are part of government debt at a higher interest rate than regular debt, Mr. Speaker. So we must include it when we speak about debt. I'm putting it to you, Mr. Speaker. I'm putting it to you that here is a summary of the entire debt that the people of St. Lucia have to incur. In terms of total domestic debt, $1.826 billion. In terms of total external debt, $1.947 billion. Outstanding payables, $93 million. Design finance contracts, $100 million. St. Lucia's total indebtedness, as we speak, and we're not sure about all the design finance contracts, is $3.966 billion. Nearly $4 billion is owed by the people of St. Lucia as we speak, Mr. Speaker. $4 billion. $4 billion. That is what the young people of St. Lucia will have to pay in the future. $4 billion of debt, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the COVID pandemic has been disastrous, but it has provided the country an opportunity to refocus, to recalibrate, to examine ways of doing things. The international and regional financial institutions supported the efforts of the government. They gave us concessionary loans. They helped us. They gave us income support for the first time. But, Mr. Speaker, in April 2020, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, because of COVID, reduced the discount rate for the first time since 2003. I'll say it again. Because, Mr. Speaker, when they go into the comparisons of you do this, you do that, as if their situation, I mean, they had the worst situation, we had the best. Facts. A fact, Mr. Speaker. And I always ask them to go back to the data, not by noise and innuendo and heckling, the data. I'll say it again. In April 2020, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank reduced the discount rate for the first time since 2003 from 6.5% to 2%, and also extended credit to central government for the first time. Government received moratorium on loans and significantly lower oil prices. The government could have used this opportunity to redirect the economy, to make it more resilient, and to create sustainable jobs, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, an SLP government would ensure meaningful dialogue with the private sector on the use of these borrowed funds. Mr. Speaker, an SLP government would seek to rekindle interest.
I'm very sorry to, Mr. Speaker, I'm very sorry to interrupt the Leader of the Opposition's presentation. But, Mr. Speaker, he continues to mislead the House by very convenient use of the data which is presented here. And I think in the interest of the public and in the interest of the records, we need to ensure that we set the records clear. Mr. Speaker, the debt, as he continues to mention, that will go to $4 billion, and to clearly imply that this government has sort of mismanaged the debt situation of the country. Mr. Speaker, the social economic review is very clear as to where the debt was back in 2016, where it was almost $3.1 billion. That's where it was. They borrowed, Mr. Speaker, in excess of $733 million. Mr. Speaker, even with the economic catastrophe of COVID, it is important for the public to note that this administration borrowed 11 million less than the St. Lucia Labour Party's tenure. So, Mr. Speaker, I just want to ask the Leader of the Opposition to use the facts properly so that people can digest information. Mr. Speaker, the United States, Mr. Speaker, has borrowed $1.9 trillion. They're proposing to borrow $2.2 trillion in additional to create jobs. COVID, Mr. Speaker, is not very normal times. So it's not very, very responsible by a man who's seeking to become Prime Minister.
No,
Mr. Speaker, as we speak, the debt of the people of St. Lucia is $4 billion. Mr. Speaker, the government would use...
Speaker, please, on a point of order, at where in the documents does it say the current debt is $4 billion? The current debt, according to the numbers right now, preliminary numbers for official public debt is $3.773 billion.
I'm glad that, I'm very happy that the Minister of Finance fell into the trap. Total domestic debt, according to the document, is $1.82 billion, according to the document that he's quoting. Total external debt is $1.947 billion, according to the document that he's quoting. Agreed? That's $3.7 billion. I said so from the beginning. Outstanding payables are $93 million. And the design finance contracts are valued at $100 million. Gives a total of $3.966 billion. That is the total debt of the government of St. Lucia at this point.
Again, on a point of order, I came to this honourable House and quoted from the Financial Act as to how direct finance awards to be treated, and it's not considered part of the debt. If in fact the member chooses to do that, when he gets into office, he can amend the act and include it. But currently, right now, Mr. Speaker, in collaboration with the IMF and the World Bank, the Finance Act was done, and that is how direct finance awards are treated.
Mr. Speaker, let me agree with him. Let me agree with him. He wants that? Normal, he wants everybody to always agree with him. Yes. Okay, agreed. But the fact is, these direct finance contracts have to be repaid by the people of St. Lucia at an interest rate of 5% over a short-term period. So I agree with you. I agree with you.
Again, Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, we've come to this House, we've indicated the direct finance awards have an 18-month moratorium period. a 5-year repayment at 5%, Mr. Speaker. So if in fact that he wants to compare that to what they were borrowing money, or in fact what they could not borrow the money for.
Mr. Speaker, the taxpayers of this country, the young people of this country,
Honorable Member, Honorable Prime Minister, you will, in about 4 hours' time, you will surely.
I've sat here, Mr. Speaker, in attempts to do that, but when one person is deliberately trying to mislead people, then I have to stand up on that point. It's a point that has been discussed in this House before, Mr. Speaker. Right? And information has been brought to this House and given to the honourable member. So I would not expect it. Either that he's forgotten, and I'll give him the benefit of the doubt that maybe he forgot, because I certainly can't believe that he would deliberately try to convince people otherwise. Yeah. And the other problem, Mr. Speaker, is that he knows we put in the gas tax, and the gas tax revenue is what is going to repay it. So the fact is that these are dedicated revenue streams. Yeah. So the fact is accommodation is being made for those things, right, and that has been discussed in this House, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable.
Mr. Speaker, that is exactly why the country is how it is here today. That's exactly why. Because they refuse to say, that is the situation, let us sit back and let us try to remedy the situation. They get up in their pompous attitude and try to deny the fact that the taxpayers of this country will have to pay back $100 million of direct finance contracts. At least. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the COVID situation, Mr. Speaker, allow the government, give the government the opportunity to refocus, Mr. Speaker. The government should recommence negotiations with the promoters of the wind farm project in Dennery to help in the energy-saving efforts of the country. The government, Mr. Speaker, should engage...
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order. The principle of the wind farm is deceased, and I'm sure the member is aware of that.
Honourable members.
The government of St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker, should seek to renegotiate. They should seek to renegotiate with the promoters of the wind farm project to see if they could reduce the energy costs for energy in St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, in seeking new opportunities in the green economy, the SLP government...
Honourable members, we all need to hear the leader of the opposition. Leader of the opposition, continue.
Mr. Speaker, the SLP government would not cancel a loan. The SLP government would not cancel a loan approved by the Caribbean Development Bank to replace 21,500 high-pressure sodium lamps, which would not only reduce our carbon imprint, but would save the taxpayer over $9 million per year in payment for street lighting. The loan from the CDB was approved by President's recommendation number 921 of May 2016. The loan was for US $11.7 million, with counterpart financing by the government of St. Lucia and Lucilec to equivalents of US $1.14 million. To this day, after the Pajora letter and other promises, the project has not materialized, and the taxpayers continue to be burdened with high payments for public lighting. Mr. Speaker, this is not a dream. It wasn't a hotel. It wasn't a hotel in Point Seraphine. It was a real project
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order again, the member for Castries East and leader of the opposition continues to mislead the House because he is speaking about things that he knows nothing about. The street lighting project has started. The lights are being installed in Grosile. The member for Grosile spoke about it. You know, Mr. Speaker, it's amazing that the member would come to this House and speak as an authority. If you want to know what is happening, ask a question. Don't come and make blanket statements that nothing has happened. When over 1,000 lights are being installed as we speak. And I'm not talking about the lights in the various constituencies, you know. I'm speaking about the lights under this project, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, in May 2016, May, not last week, not last month, not last year, in May 2016, the Caribbean Development Bank, under President's recommendation 921, approved a loan from May to begin replacing 21,500 lamps, street lamps in St. Lucia from May last year. From May 2016, after the Pajora letter, Mr. Speaker, after the Pajora letter, after the loan was approved by the CDB, they cancelled the loan with the CDB and the loan went to the government of Suriname. So now, if they are starting it last year or last week or in Grosile, that could have started in May of 2016. And I challenge them. And if they want, I can send to get President's recommendation 921 from the Caribbean Development Bank. If you give me 5 minutes, I can get it to you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to this day, they have not given the reason why they've cancelled the loan from the Caribbean Development Bank. You know why, Mr. Speaker? Because Lucelec was given special approval to install the lights on their own. Lucelec, there will be no minister will have been involved in awarding the contract. No minister. No minister. The CDB stipulated that Lucelec were the ones to have to install the lights. But in their situation, a minister determined who is going to install the lights. That is why they declined the loan from the CDB in May 2016. They actually wrote a letter declining the loan in May 2016. President's recommendation 921. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister disclosed that 8,000 students and teachers have access to learning devices. 8,000 in his budget address. Mr. Speaker, the Social and Economic Review tells you that there are 14,552 students at the primary school level and 1,008 teachers. There are 10,925 students at the secondary schools and 1,017 students, Mr. Speaker. By the Prime Minister's own admission, out of the 25,447 students in schools in St. Lucia and 2,025 teachers, only 8,000 have access to digital devices. By his own admission, only 8,000 out of these 25,447 students have access to digital devices. And he says, and I quote, this has caused a significant dent in the digital gap. 8,000 of the 25 has caused a significant dent. That is how to think of the people of St. Lucia. We must be happy. We must thank the great leader. When only 8,000 have access, when they came into power and they found a situation where every child today would have had one laptop for themselves, Mr. Speaker. And they stopped it. And now they boast that only 8,000 have access to digital devices. No wonder every day, people come to my constituency office asking for digital devices. And to yours too. Every day. But you want to be in denial. The party. You're in denial of the truth. Mr. Speaker, the St. Lucia Labour Party has been wrongly accused of being anti-investment. But the truth is, Mr. Speaker, more investment has happened under the St. Lucia Labour Party than under the United Workers' Party, particularly investment in tourism. More investment has happened under the United Workers' Party than more investment happened on the St. Lucia Labour Party than the United Workers' Party. More investment, but they accuse us of being anti-investment. Mr. Speaker, our position on investment is clear. Our position on investment is clear. Very clear. We will provide the same incentives to local entrepreneurs as we give to foreign investors. Our position is clear. We will jealously guard our patrimony and protect our environment. Mr. Speaker, the St. Lucia Labour Party negotiated to give the town of Soufrière World Heritage status and the Pitons a World Heritage site. The opportunities and possibilities for development in Soufrière have not been fully explored. An SLP government will, after constructive engagement with the people of Soufrière, will make full use of the status, of the heritage status, for sustainable growth and development. Mr. Speaker, we hear about the expansion of call centers and the situation on Ojo Labs. Our position, Mr. Speaker, on Ojo Labs has always been clear. We need full disclosure of the expenses that taxpayers bear for the operation of Ojo Labs. That's all we're saying. We need full disclosure. Mr. Speaker, this cannot be a secret. I want to assure, Mr. Speaker, that this party, we want to ensure the workers at Ojo Labs that in no way we will jeopardize the prospects of employment. And we will work with management in an effort. We will work with management, but we will be transparent. We'll have full disclosure of the benefits that the people, the owners of Ojo Labs have. The benefits will be for everyone to hear. Mr. Speaker, it was the Labour Party government that first started assistance for call centers. We assisted a local call center owner. E-Services, a call center from Jamaica, which we negotiated, employed 500 persons. So call centers is not new to St. Lucia. It's not genius of the UWP that's caused call centers come in St. Lucia. I have negotiated call centers, Minister for Investment. In Grosile, there is a call center which was negotiated with Wayne Vitalis, NDC, and myself, 500 people. Helen IT, we negotiated it. KM Solutions. So when they come and they boast about, oh, we're doing well, we have call centers, as if that is something new and something novel, Mr. Speaker. Again, Mr. Speaker, they refuse to accept reality, Mr. Speaker. The SLP government, Mr. Speaker, will look to advance the investment and diversify into project coding and other forms of technology for the young people of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, our investment focus cannot be selling of thousands of acres of land in the south and hundreds in the north. We should not be using our NDC funds on investment projects to borrow for investment projects and then beat our chest and boast when we make $2 million. And when it is clear that the same investor has had a return on investment of over 300% on the sale of only 6 acres of that land. But we boast because we say we make 2 million, Mr. Speaker. And after he's made that money, he still owns 300 acres. And you know what we say? We say that no solution can do it. No solution can do it. Only foreigners can do it, Mr. Speaker. I'm putting it to you, Mr. Speaker. I'm putting it to you. That if this government had allowed the NIC to purchase the 300 acres of land and had prepared with the assistance and the support and entered into a strategic alliance with St. Lucians in the diaspora, with local business people, with foreign hoteliers, we could have had an integrated project at Cabot, and it would not mean that we would have lost 300 acres of land in St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when we say that, Mr. Speaker, we are not anti-investment. We are just pro-common sense and pro-country. We're not anti-investment. We're pro-common sense and we're pro-country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the SAP government would invest in the youth economy to secure youth economic empowerment, to address the special interests of young people in economic activities that embrace sports, entertainment, creative industries, technology, and agriculture. The goal, Mr. Speaker, is to provide sustainable employment for young people by turning skills into businesses and hobbies into entrepreneurship. We will endeavor to make St. Lucia the first youth-friendly island in the OECS. And Mr. Speaker, I want to remind you, Mr. Speaker, of something. Because, Mr. Speaker, they boast about entertainment to artists as if they were the first people to do that. Mr. Speaker, I want to show you, Mr. Speaker, a document. NDC and CDF announced a $250,000 assistance package to artists and entertainment under the government of the St. Lucia Labour Party. Mr. Speaker, NDC and CDF announced in 2006 a $250,000 assistance package to artists and entertainers. Mr. Speaker, this is our position on investments: to create an enabling environment of equity, fairness, transparency, openness, equal opportunity, and wealth creation for the provision of sustainable, well-paying jobs. Mr. Speaker, job creation is still one of our main objectives because we believe that unemployment is an evil with unforetold consequences. Mr. Speaker, we will invest in the culture and history of our people by assisting the Folk Research Center to reopen its center, and we will recommence work on the Derrick Walcott project. But most importantly, we will reinstate the subvention to the National Trust to allow it to function properly. Mr. Speaker, if one listens to the rhetoric coming from this side, you will believe that the UWP were never in power. The United West Party was never in power. Never, never. The UWP were never in power. They were never there. The Labour Party was in power all the time. Mr. Speaker, the United Workers' Party have been in power for a longer period than the St. Lucia Labour Party from the year 1964. They controlled this country for 40 years. Mr. Speaker, for 40 years. So they pretend as if they were never in power. They pretend. But they were in power. They were in power. They've been promising hotels from 2006. They promised hotels. The UWP. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Let me turn, Mr. Speaker, to education to education, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when you are members on the other side, you will believe that the SLP did nothing for education, nothing at all. You will believe that the SLP did not stop the shift system. The shift system was stopped by the St. Lucia Labour Party, where children attended half-day school. That could be a possible reason for the high level of indiscipline and problems in some part of the demographic of the country, Mr. Speaker. We solved the problem of the shift system by the Dimple at Louise School, where all students could have gone to school for the entire day. The Labour Party did that. We did that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we stopped the horror of children at age 11 being considered failures because they could not find a secondary school to go to, continuing from where Sir John Compton left. But, Mr. Speaker, it hurts me. It really hurts me, Mr. Speaker. When I see people, it hurts me, Mr. Speaker, it hurts me. When I see people whose parents will not be able to afford to send them to boarding school, whose parents will not be able to afford to send them to secondary school abroad, whose parents will not be able to afford to give them the best education in Canada and otherwise, they come and they clap when we say that it was an achievement to have universal secondary school education. They say, well, but Mr. Speaker, that is the cancel culture. That's the cancel culture, Mr. Speaker. They don't understand the social divisions that existed in this country. And they don't understand how education leveled the playing field. They don't understand, Mr. Speaker, or they pretend not to understand because of their partisanship positions. They don't understand the value Mr. Speaker, of a child being able to go to a secondary school. They don't understand it, or they do understand it because some of them suffered from it themselves. When they could not go, when you could not afford, or if you couldn't afford, you couldn't pass the entrance examination. Mr. Speaker, I went to St. Mary's College. I had 97% in English and 97.23% in mathematics. I went to St. Mary's College with that, and many people got more than me. That was a level of competition that existed to go to a secondary school in St. Lucia. And when I tell young people, don't worry for all the pictures on Facebook and on Instagram and all of the shots, the reality is, Mr. Speaker, when most of them, when the time came for them to go to secondary school, because their parents could not afford to send them to boarding school, they had to undergo the horrors of not being able to get a place in a secondary school. And I commend the St. Lucia Labour Party for making universal secondary school acceptable to the people of St. Lucia. Of course, Mr. Speaker, universal secondary school education wasn't perfect. They need to tweak it and to change it, of course. Yes, but it was a start, Mr. Speaker, and our government will look into both universal and primary school to see if we can make it better, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, another initiative that they don't want to admit to is the availability of scholarships for children of ordinary people to go to study in Cuba and other parts of the world. Mr. Speaker, how many people in St. Lucia would be doctors? Go to the hospital now. Go to them, Mr. Speaker. The doctors are trained in Cuba, most of them. How many students, how many people would have been able to get an education if this Labour Party had not negotiated scholarships for people in Cuba? Engineers, doctors, agriculturists, Mr. Speaker, and they talk about the Labour Party doesn't know about education and what you do for Marshall. Go to Marshall and you'll see the amount of people who were born in Marshall who are now doctors and specialists in this country. And I'm proud of them because my government allowed them scholarships to go to study. That's what I did for Marshall. I have lifted the people. That's what we did for Marshall. That's what we did for Mr. Gill. That's what we did for Marshall. That's what we did for them. We educated them. We brought them up. The tide, we brought them up. We stopped the 2 St. Lucia's, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, go and you'll find out how many people who got educated. And Mr. Speaker, instead of because of their biasness, instead of admitting that was good, no, they look for ways and means to attack me, to get personal, because they don't speak the truth, Mr. Speaker. But the truth will always prevail, and the truth can set us free. If it were not for the St. Lucia Labour Party and the scholarships, many people would not have got a university education today. Many people, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, they say, oh, you spend $1 million only in schools. Mr. Speaker, I'll make it available to you, Mr. Speaker, a document about school maintenance. Because when they come and they talk this thing and they make you believe it's true, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the period 2015 to April 2015 to February 2016, the allocations for schools were as follows. Recurrent, 430,000. Capital, 554,000. School stimulus, 147,000. Electrical capital works in schools, 446,000. 12,000 for special works. Electrical small works in schools, 90,000. Rehabilitation of works in selected schools, 102,000. $1.78 million in that year for repairs to schools, Mr. Speaker. But further, Mr. Speaker, we built the Saltibus. The following schools were refurbished under the Basic Education Enhancement Project, BEEP. The Saltibus Combined School, the Daniel Riviere Combined School, the Denry Primary School, and the Deriso Combined School. Renovation works were carried out at the Viewfort Infant School at a cost of $1.2 million. A 2-story building at the Corinth Secondary School was built at a cost of $3.2 million. A 3-story building replaced the 2-story building at the cost of $6 million at the Glendon Mason Secondary School. A new block was built at the Forest Primary School at a cost of $3.2 million. The Canaries Infant School was rehabilitated after damage caused by the Christmas Eve slough at a cost of $750,000. The Miku Infant School was disestablished by the Ministry of Education, and a new block was constructed at the Miku Primary School to accommodate the new students. The primary school was extended at a cost of $2.6 million, Mr. Speaker. On the 17th of March 2016, a contract signing ceremony was held at the offices of the Ministry of Infrastructure, Port Service and Transport to signal the commencement of construction activities for a new Denry Infant School, Mr. Speaker. The Scherzel Secondary School, in January 2016, bids were invited for the construction of 3 new classroom blocks at the Scherzel Secondary School. They will accommodate 12 classrooms, a sick bay with toilet facilities, resource room, technical drawing room, students' washrooms, information technology lab, electronic document preparation and management, a laboratory for physics and chemistry with prep room, music room, and theater room, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and I applaud the government for continuing work on these schools. Who would not want schools to be built? But why boast? Why come and try to change the history and pretend that you are the only ones who did anything for education, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, further, we gave every student $500 stipend went for the common entrance, a brainchild of the member for Viewfort South. Every student. We did not say, come to my constituency office. We didn't say, give it to candidates who lose elections. We didn't say that. We didn't say, vote for me, I'll give it to you. You didn't say, I will win the election, so I'll give you a voucher. We gave every student $500 once they had passed the common entrance examination. We gave, Mr. Speaker, we gave teachers a stipend to help them to buy equipment for the primary schools, for the schools, Mr. Speaker. That's what we did. So we did things for education, and we're going to do it further. We're going to go further, Mr. Speaker. Our dream, Mr. Speaker, our dream, when the Labour Party gets back into office, is to improve the quality of early childhood education, to review both the primary and secondary school education system, and to create an enabling environment so that every household can produce a university or professional graduate within a reasonable time. That is the philosophy of the St. Lucia Labour Party. Mr. Speaker, I turn now to speak on health, although my colleagues have adequately dealt with the situation as far as health is concerned, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, fact. The UWP has presided over the construction of St. Jude for more time than the St. Lucia Labour Party. Fact. The St. Jude Hospital construction has been under the control of the United Workers' Party government for more years than the St. Lucia Labour Party. And up to this day, St. Jude has not been completed. Fact. Mr. Speaker, they ignored the fact that there was a handover report. I had to come in this honorable house and say that there was a handover report. Then they agreed, yes, there was one. The handover report wasn't prepared by any minister. It wasn't prepared by the minister, by the Prime Minister at the time, or the Minister of Economic Development. It was prepared by technocrats that they employed. We never change the technocrats that they do, like they do. We never change the technocrats when they go into government. We found them at the St. Jude Hospital, and we kept them. They are the ones who prepared the handover report, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, they took the police with guns and green uniforms and all kind of military hardware, and they went and they invaded, they put a search warrant on somebody's premises in Corinth. All sorts of things. It was being directed by a government minister. Police with guns, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we have to speak about the use. Because, Mr. Speaker, up to today, they have not resolved impacts that they promised to resolve. Up to today, impacts has not been resolved, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, we have to talk about the use of violence in this country, but that's for another show. Because up to today, impacts has not been resolved. They took guns and they went to somebody's premises in Corinth to say they're searching for St. Jude Hospital equipment. Up to this day, we do not know what was found. We do not know where it went. We don't know if anybody was charged. We don't know what they did with it. Up to today, we do not know what happened after that police search, Mr. Speaker. Up to today. Mr. Speaker, we all know, Mr. Speaker, that in the beginning of the construction of St. Jude, St. Jude was a crisis that at the time, St. Jude was a crisis that at the time the government moved swiftly to solve the situation by moving people to the stadium. Everybody supported. There is nobody in this honorable house who disagreed with the government when they moved people to the stadium, because we knew it was an emergency, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, we are saying that medical professionals, not me, and there are some people in this honorable house who believe they are engineers, they are economists, they are doctors, they are nurses, they are lawyers, they are constitutional lawyers, they are everything. Some people in this house. They know everything. They can speak on everything. You will never hear me come in this honorable house and speak about health matters. I will say what I know generically, in a holistic manner, but I will not speak like an authority on these matters, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, health officials, people in the Medical and Dental Association, they made the point that the East Block east wing of the buildings could have been used, Mr. Speaker, to move the people away. You see, Mr. Speaker, that is the problem, Mr. Speaker. That's the problem, Mr. Lucia. That's why we are where we are today. Mr. Speaker, that hurts. It hurts. You cannot distinguish a man's profession from his politics. Everything for them is politics. Everything for them is politics. Somebody works in the Ministry of Infrastructure because they say he supported Pierre, a grade 5. They fire him. They refuse to renew his contract. Everybody in the civil service now working in the Ministry of Transport has to be approved by a minister. Everything for them is politics. People at the lowest level, cleaners, drivers, grave diggers, have to be employed by politicians, Mr. Speaker. That's the problem. So here's a man who is a doctor, a fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons. He makes an opinion, but you say you want to water it down because you say he's politics. That's the problem. Cathy and Werner from Denby North, fired, Mr. Speaker. That's the problem. Everything for them is politics. So, Mr. Speaker, medical professionals made the point that they could have moved people to the East Wing. They never listened. They didn't sit back and say, let's look at it. Let's look at it. Let's see whether we can do it. Because the person who said it, they perceived him to be political, they fired him. Same way they fired the cabinet secretary. Same way, because they perceived them to be labor. So they fired him, Mr. Speaker. They fired him, Mr. Speaker. And now, as we speak,
Mr. Speaker, again, the member is misleading the House. Tell the member to declare which cabinet secretary was fired. He was fired? Fired by whom?
Member.
You see, Mr. Speaker, it cannot be fair. It cannot be fair to the people of St. Lucia to sit and listen to the leader of the opposition consistently misleading the House with false information. No government minister can fire a public servant.
Honorable.
Mr. Speaker, only the Public Service Commission can fire anybody who is on permanent establishment within the service. So the member is misleading the House with false information.
Mr. Speaker, Nigel Joseph, an employee of the ministry.
We know what the law is. We know what the law is and who can do what and who cannot do what. Do not in any way give the impression that ministers fired.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The cabinet secretary is no longer cabinet secretary. Mr. Speaker, and right now he has a government in court, Mr. Speaker, because he's still in his job. Mr. Speaker, up to today, the St. Jude Hospital, Mr. Speaker, the St. Jude Hospital has not been opened. The people are still in the stadium, and the minister in charge will come and tell you, we gave more direct awards. That's his excuse, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, when both of these ministers of finances, both of them, the Minister of Finance from Beaufort South and the Minister of Finance from Castries North, when they gave these direct awards, it was being done on a basis of you get the money, so you spend it. There was no time to tender. But right now, they came here in this honorable house from the year 2016 or 2017, I say 2018 if they want it, and they profess that the Taiwanese government would have given them money to build a new St. Jude. They haven't put out one tender. When these two members gave direct awards, there was no fixed line of expenditure. Money was not identified. It was on a basis of when I have it, when I spend it. But from the year 2018, they came in this honorable house and they boasted that the Taiwanese government would give them money to build a new St. Jude. They haven't put out one tender for the installation of one block at the St. Jude Hospital. Mr. Speaker, that is a reality. I want to assure Mr. Speaker, the people of St. Lucia, that the Labour Party will immediately take every available opportunity to reopen St. Jude for the benefit of the people of the South, the doctors and nurses of the South, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, right now, you put cladding, same thing they did with the respiratory hospital. They paint it. Oh, new hospital, Veglé, flashing mirrors, gouvernement Veglé. They paint it, and the boss will paint it, take pictures, click, click, click. Click. On the hospital, St. Jude Hospital. But why is they saying that? And they get very annoyed when the member for 10 minutes made the point that the X-ray machine is not working. I'm going to say further. Mr. Speaker. Further. And if I'm wrong, say I'm wrong. Last week or week before, there was no water at the OKEU hospital. Patients, relatives had to bring wipes for them to use at the hospital because there was no water. But you spend $20 million on less than 2 miles of road. Mr. Speaker, this cannot be right. In spite of all your party affiliations, this cannot be right. Your priorities are wrong. Your priorities are wrong, Mr. Speaker. You should have moved the people to the East Wing as advised by the medical professionals to stop the suffering at the stadium as we speak, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've not done it before in this honorable house for this session, but I'm going to speak about Kashmir East. Because the same people who said that you should have demonstrations in Marcia instead, the same people who said that Marcia should be for demonstrations, the same people who said that you should not bring jazz to Marcia because these people don't understand it, the same people who spend years and years not even knowing where Marcia was when they wanted to say Ravine to 12. They said to 12 Ravine. The same people who never knew where Marcia was. The same people who were afraid to go to Marcia. The same people to tell Ravine. That's what they said. That's what, yes. To tell Ravine. That's how they said. The same people who fought me for putting jazz in Marcia. The same people who said that Marcia was only good for people to demonstrate. The same people who were fixing up their careers in the civil service, trying to get promotion to be permanent secretaries. I was there. These same people right now, Marcia. What Pierre do for Marcia? You know what Pierre do for Marcia? Pierre loves the people of Marcia. And they love Pierre too. And Pierre won 5 times. And Pierre will win 6 times. And if you don't like it, tell them put it in their pipe and smoke it. That's my record of 5-time general for the people of Kashmir East. And I share that together with the Honorable Dr. Kenny Anthony and the Honorable Stephen King. None of you can say that. You had to run and lose and buy. Mr. Speaker, these are the people. These are the people, Mr. Speaker, who talk about Marcia. Because they believe that the people of Marcia are stupid. Last time, they went there and they carried babies. carry babies on their shoulder in the George Charles Boulevard. I'll put a toilet for you, put a toilet for you. They went there and they carry people children on their shoulder. That hypocrisy. People, you have no time for them. Complete disdain. You hold them in contempt. But for election time, you're going to carry them on your shoulder. I love you. But the same people that you went in the boulevard and you told them you'll build toilets for them. When the government, through the Caribbean Development Bank, I get emotional about that. Because that hypocrisy and that... Mr. Speaker, that hypocrisy and that bluff hurts me. The same people that you're going to carry their children, that have no toilets, Mr. Speaker, when you build a toilet for them, they criticize you. They put you on Facebook when you build a toilet for them, and they refuse to fix it, and they say you must write letters. And I've written several letters to get the George Charles Boulevard facility repaired. They refuse to do it because they want to make peers suffer. You know, Mr. Speaker? But I'll tell you something. You know where they will suffer? In the polls when the next general elections come. The same people, Mr. Speaker, the same people who removed Carnival from Marchand, the same people who stopped the Calypso contest in Marchand, the same people who stopped Virgin football competition in Marchand, they stopped Virgin. They called the lady and told her, do not do the competition in the Virgin football competition. Do not do it. The same people. When I had a football competition for the young people of Marchand, they wrote Amanda in Virgin. I know them too. I was there. Don't think I backward. I have my same connections. Better than a lot of you. These same people, they wrote Virgin. They called them Amanda, and they told her to stop the project, to stop the football in Marchand. If not, they will put pressure on Virgin. Serious. For the young people of Marchand, they stopped the Virgin holders. I mentioned no boy name. In the cap fit, wait. Mr. Speaker, these are the people who talk about Marchand, Mr. Speaker. Let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, when the people of Marchand, when there was the Black Malay disaster, when the people's homes were moving in Marchand, I was there. Dr. Anthony was there. We went and they said that we were spending too much money in Marchand. They said we were spending too much money because these people didn't deserve to be moved to Kareli. That's what they said. We spend that money and the municipal to give them a better quality of life. And even in Kareli, they still remember the government or the St. Lucia Labour Party. Mr. Speaker, let me tell you about Marchand. Mr. Speaker, Marchand is not a town. Marchand is not a village. Marchand is part of Castries. When there's employment in St. Lucia, people of Marchand get employed. When the schools are better in St. Lucia, I'm Mr. Speaker, talking about schools. Let's talk about schools. See, Mr. Speaker, this morning I was talking to my colleague, and I said to him, do you think I should talk about your constituency? He says, comrade, speak from your heart. If I speak from my heart, I'll finish at 5 o'clock. Because, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, that kind of love and connection that I have with my constituency. Mr. Speaker, you know every time I go home, I'll pass in my constituency. I have never left and I will never leave. I ain't going nowhere. I've never left and I will never leave. I'm proud of the people that I represent, Mr. Speaker. I'm proud of them. So, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Marchand, in 1997, when Kenny Anthony was Prime Minister, in 1997, when Kenny Anthony was Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, do you know, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, do you know, Mr. Speaker, do you know, Mr. Speaker, that there were places in Pave, just there. Pave, even no electricity, surprise you. In Pave, just there. You surprised, eh? Just there. In 1997. Do you know, Mr. Speaker? Do you know, Mr. Speaker? That in Pave, just there. Pave, just there. And there are people, and that's why I win, you know. That's why I continue to win. Because when they say, what Pierre do for Marchand, the young ladies in the banks, the ladies in the government service, the ladies who were living in these areas, they remember what Pierre did for Marchand. They remember. They remember. They remember. And that's why, I mean, excuse me if I get emotional, because sometimes when I hear that hypocrisy and these lies, Mr. Speaker, I sometimes it really, Mr. Speaker, in Pave, in 1997, the people of Pave used to have buckets of water, and they had to walk from the top of the hill down to the police station. And there are people who work now in banks and in civil service who will tell you that they had to go to collect water. There was an industry. People used to pay guys to carry water for them up the Pave hill, because there was no water up there, Mr. Speaker. When Kenny Anthony was Prime Minister, I went to him, I said to him, Prime Minister, people can't live like that. People can't live like that, Mr. Speaker. You know what we did? We changed the pipe from the bottom by the position, we put it at the top. And up to today, the people of Pave have a reliable supply of water. That's one of the things Pierre did for Marchand. Further, Mr. Speaker, further. The young people of Pave used to be playing on the streets. I never forget, one day I held a public meeting in Pave, and I said to them, I will build you a multi-purpose court. You know, people pass and he say, let's go in the moon. On s'est jamais fait un code pavé. Qu'on l'enterre pour faire code pavé. He chastised me. A member of this side, somebody went to him. I mentioned no name today. Not a time for name calling. Somebody went to him and asked him, as minister, help the young people to put a court in Pave. He told them it would cost millions of dollars. So, go ahead. Forget that. Mr. Speaker, I went to this member for Beaufort South. And that is why they are jealous of the relationship that I have with the member for Beaufort South. They don't understand the relationship that we have in our party. They don't understand it. They don't understand that we are comrades and we have the same motive. We fight for the same struggle and we fight for the same people. That's what they don't understand. They don't understand. So that is why when they were speculating about leadership struggle, Kenny and Hilaire, they will fight this because they didn't understand that I have the full support of all members of the St. Lucia Labour Party. And that is what has surprised them. So that is why it's from the 6th of June, they want to look for all kinds of reasons and don't want to say that the last elections were held on the 6th of June because they expected that we would have problems in our party. Mr. Speaker, back to the court. The last elections were held on the 6th of June 2016 and the 6th of June 2021 will be 5 years since the last elections were held. Mr. Speaker. 6 more weeks. Mr. Speaker. So the court. Mr. Speaker. This member for Beaufort South said to me, why can you build a court in Marshall? Where can you build a court in Pave, Mr. Speaker? Where can you build a court in Pave? I went to a guy called Ronald. He has support of me. Another guy called Andy. They said, let's go, Chief. I'll show you where we're going to build a port, Mr. Court. not you, Mr. Speaker. We went down in a hole, what you call a fond, and the land borders the Diboules land. And I must thank the Diboules because they have never given the people there any problems. I must thank them for that. They are good corporate citizens. We went down, Mr. Speaker, and then we found a piece of land, but there'd have to be, you'd have to move excavation of the hill. So Royal said, yes, you can put it there. This Prime Minister, we acquired the land, and we built a court for the people of Pave. Mr. Speaker, let's leave Pave and let's move. Come, I can give you, how much time I have left? Mr. Speaker, let's leave Pave. Forget about all the footpaths. Forget about all the drainage. Forget about all the steps. Mr. Speaker, you see, because they don't understand. They don't understand what it means to people who have to have 2 pairs of shoes to go to their home. They don't understand. They don't understand it, Mr. Speaker. They don't understand it. So they boast. Mr. Speaker. They talk. What value for marchand? What value for marchand? They don't understand. They don't understand, Mr. Speaker. Let us leave. Let's leave Pave. Let's go down the road. You can pass wherever you want. You can go up the road and come down through Rockall, or you can go up the road and go through Maynard Hill. Where you want to go? Mr. Speaker, let's go down Maynard Hill, where there was a landslide. And let's go into Touge, Mr. Speaker, Touge. And I want to make the people of Touge, I want to remind them, Mr. Speaker, I want to remind them that what we started,
Honorable members.
You see, Mr. Speaker, they like to do and they can't take. He spends all his time there. Fatina. When he came to think about Virginia, he gets vexed. Mr. Speaker, so we're into Maynard Hill, yes, that's where you're going to. So in Touge, Mr. Speaker, and in Touge, Mr. Speaker, I want to tell the people of Touge that what we started when we put gutterings and water tanks for them, and that they stopped. When we get back in the government, we will start back that project for the people of Touge. And Mr. Speaker, you know, I'll tell you something. One day, I was in an airport in Ohio. And a young man came to me, and that's what gives me the strength. Mr. Speaker, you see, I don't have any money. I'm not a rich guy. I didn't make any money in politics. I didn't know how to stretch $5. See, Mr. Speaker, I can profess. I'm one politician that can profess that I can account for every cent that I have anywhere in St. Lucia. I can say, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you. So when I met this young man in the Ohio airport, he said to me, thank you, thanks parliamentary rep. I said, why? He lives at the top of Touge. And he said to me, when he used to come to visit his parents, he used to have to pay somebody to carry suitcases for him up Touge. Because there was mud, no lights, mud, nothing. Lights, no mud all over, dirt trucks over. And he says, when he came to St. Lucia, the last time, he could carry his suitcases and walk to his house in pride and dignity. See, Mr. Speaker, these are the stories that they don't understand. These are the stories they don't understand. The stories of helping people, of improving people's lives, of putting people first. Then, Mr. Speaker, we come down into Maynard Hill. We come in there now. Well, because you know how they'll change. You were there. Let us come. You can't remember now. Mr. Speaker, what surprises me with some of my colleagues here, they know what I'm talking about, you know. But the yellowness in them, the jaundice. Mr. Speaker, they know. Some of them do not know. Some people don't know that reality, you know. There are some people who do not know the reality of what I'm speaking about. They never lived it. They don't understand it. I know that. There are some people who never understand that reality. They are privileged. But, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that there are many others in this House who were not that privileged, who understand the reality of what I'm speaking about. The reality of need. The reality of being deprived. The reality of not having free meals to go to school. The reality of not having exercise books. When they want me to speak, and up to today, I can give you exercise books that I gave to the children of Marshall to educate themselves, to educate them, Mr. Speaker. Exercise that I gave. That's what I did for Marshall. I gave children who had no exercise books, I gave them exercise books so they could go to school. Simple, but important. And those of us who can afford it don't understand that. Mr. Speaker, so we're in Toulouse, Mr. Speaker. The children had nowhere to play. Nowhere to play. Again, discussions with the member for Vieux-Fort South. And I told him, we need to have somewhere for the children to play. We did. We found an area that was owned by a family. We acquired it. And we built a park for the children in Toulouse. You know what they said? They said I was building a park by a river, and the river was smelling. I can put a park there. That's what they criticized me. They said I was playing politics. For the children of Toulouse to have a park, I was playing politics. We built the park with the Taiwanese funds. We refurbished the park. I wrote them on several occasions to tell them, please, I have one daughter. I have one daughter. I have one daughter. You guys are when you see they're going somewhere now. But when I go there, I hope they get vexed. I have one daughter, Mr. Speaker. You see where they're going now? When I go there, I hope they never get vexed. Because they like to do you first. They like to do you first. When you do them back, they complain. I have been in this business for long. My back is large. Nothing you can say about me can affect me because I know the truth. So I want them to go where they're going, but when I go, do not get vexed. Because if you trouble me, I'll go there too. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. I'll tell you something. I wrote them on several occasions to tell them, I wrote them on several occasions, Mr. Speaker, to ask them to repair, to fix the park for me in Toulouse. They refuse all kind of excuses. The park is closed, who have the keys, and up to today, the children of Toulouse are deprived. Mr. Speaker, I wanted to invite you, and I invite you in the next government, to come and see the joy in the children's heart when they are playing in the park. Mr. Speaker, they eat their ice cream. Children of regular people, MacGyver's children, regular people. They have, and they have their Wi-Fi, they have their swings, they have their chairs, and they come in the park on Sundays, and they enjoy themselves. They have deprived the children of that because these people vote for Philip J. Pierre. They have deprived the children of that. And I've written them several occasions. I said to them, repair the park, please. Not for me. Not for me. Repair it. They refuse to do it. Because they want the people to suffer because people voted for Philip J. Pierre. But I can tell them something. These people will vote again for Philip J. Pierre at the next general election. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to give you a tour of my constituency. Because I can take you to Bagatelle, to Jerusalem, to Texas, to New Jack City.
Honorable Member, let me just inform you that you end at 10 past 2.
I have to end at 10 past 2. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can take you all along there, but I won't take you because I know we have other things to deal with. Mr. Speaker, go and talk to these people. PN information, PN information. Mr. Speaker, you know about the Marshall, the now it's called the Charles Gashi School? You know what it looked like in 1997? You know what it looked like, Mr. Speaker? You know what it looked like, Mr. Speaker? Right now, we have a school, concrete, we've tiled the floors. All of it happened when we were in government. When we are out of government, they refuse to do anything for the constituency because they want the people to turn against Philip J. Pierre, just like all of us in this honorable house. Once you're out of government, they send their surrogates, they send their people to do things on the side, they starve you because they want people not to vote for you. But we have been there, all of us here, some of us here from the Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister and myself, been there from 1997, and the rest of my colleagues been there for 3 terms, Mr. Speaker, and the Honorable Unesile will start his 2nd term very shortly. All of them, Mr. Speaker, they starve the constituencies because they want us to suffer, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, now let's leave it and let's go to Anchipo, because they believe that they have some strength in Anchipo, Mr. Speaker. Ask the people in Garden Grove. Ask them about how their homes were in jeopardy. The river was taking their homes, Mr. Speaker. Go ask them. Go ask them. Go see for yourself what Pierre do for Marshall. Go see for yourself. You will see these retaining structures that have saved these houses for these people. Go by the Adlin home, and you see these retaining structures that have saved the people all around the Anchipo basin. Anchipo has the best roads in housing areas in the country. Go ask them. Go ask them about the lights. Little things, because that is what you can do for a part of a country. Mr. Speaker, and if you want, we can go to Bocage. But Mr. Speaker, I don't want to take you on too much of a tour. I want to leave it, because I just want to make a point to you, Mr. Speaker, that when then we're not talking about the schools, the support to schools. We are talking about the, Mr. Speaker, the Marshall grounds, Mr. Speaker. And my colleague from Denver North can tell you. We put lights on the Marshall grounds, and the lights there, we had lights in Marshall before Sabina Park in Jamaica. And these lights are world-class lights for the people of Marshall. We put the lights on, Mr. Speaker. We spent $1 million on the playing field. That playing field, people used to break their legs in it. We spent $1 million on the playing field in Marshall, the Marshall grounds. We fixed the changing rooms. Then we have to fix the stands. They refuse to do it. They refuse. They refuse to maintain the grounds because they want the people that will suffer because they vote for Philip J. Pierre. We repaired the James Belgrave Court. We repaired it. It got vandalized, quite wrongly, but we did it, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, when they go and they posture in my constituency, they posture and they offering people contract and piece of plywood and 2 sheets of galvanized and all kind of cut some grass for some dollars. What do you do for Marchand? What do you do for Marchand? Anywhere they go, Mr. Speaker, they get tipped and I get the plate. See, Mr. Speaker? So, Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that the people of Marshall, the people of Castries East, they and I have a special bond. And that is why they have re-elected me for 5 years, and they re-elect me again, Mr. Speaker. And those of them who have barely won their seats, they better watch it. Those of them who have barely won their seats, they better watch it, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in his budget address, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance tried to use his imagination to determine where the country would be if the country had not been impacted by COVID last year. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, there have been still no new hotels, there have been no St. Jude Hospital, there have been no Gozile Highway, and there will be no new airport. If the country was not impacted by COVID, there still would have been no new hotels, no St. Jude Hospital, no Gozile Highway, and no new airports. As usual, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance imagined where St. Lucia would be if COVID had struck in 2015. What I can assure, Mr. Speaker, what I can assure the Minister of Finance is that in our response would have been quicker, it would have been more robust, our quarantine facilities at St. Jude would have been used, we would never have spoken about Rat Island, but most importantly, we would have used the concessionary finance to give more income support to people and to reduce hardship. That is what would have happened, Mr. Speaker, if COVID had struck when we were in government. Mr. Speaker, if we were in government, every child would have had a laptop and not be at a disadvantage with their schoolwork because of a lack of device, Mr. Speaker. Farmers, fishers, vendors, and small business people and vendors would have had more income support. That is what a caring government would do. The people who are kept in isolation would feel better, so there might have been no suicides, Mr. Speaker. That's what a caring government would do, Mr. Speaker. That's what the government of the Labour Party would have done if we were in government. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance also developed a scenario. He said if there was no COVID and the United Workers' Party had won, and the United Workers' Party had not won the elections, where St. Lucia would be. He developed these scenarios. Let me tell you where it would be, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if the St. Lucia Labour Party was in power after 2016, our country would have a Shock Bay Grosley Road, a secondary roads improvement project, which would upgrade 6.9 kilometers of road from the Shock roundabout to the Grosley Junction and improve approximately 20 kilometers of secondary roads financed by the Fund for Arab Economic Development and the OPIC Fund. That is where it would have been if we had won the elections in 2016. If we had won in 2016, Mr. Speaker, the Iwanora Airport development would have been completed under a PPP arrangement. If we had won in 2016, Mr. Speaker, the St. Jude Hospital would have been completed. If we had won in 2016, the OKE Hospital would have been fully commissioned. Now, Mr. Speaker, why is someone at the OKE Hospital? Let me make a point. They come there and parade and say, you had a naming ceremony. Mr. Speaker, you know when the naming ceremony happened? The naming ceremony was in February 2016, and the elections were in June 2016. So when you hear them speak, the way they speak, as if the naming ceremony was years before, it was a few months before the general elections. See, Mr. Speaker? And they know very well why it had to happen. They know very well. Mr. Speaker, so in February, in February, Mr. Speaker, it happened in February, and the elections were in June. Mr. Speaker, it happened in February. No, Mr. Speaker, if the St. Lucia Labour Party was in power, we would have universal health care for the people of St. Lucia. If the St. Lucia Labour Party were in power, we would have a caring, transparent party in government, and the people would come first, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I end where I started. It is the end of the road for the United Workers' Party government. The end is, no matter how they stretch it, the end is weeks away. The relief the people of St. Lucia have longed for is nigh. Soon, there will be no longer disrespect. There will be no longer victimization. There will no longer be untruths and sheer recklessness by people who do not care, because they do not feel what we feel, because they live in another St. Lucia. We have much to do, Mr. Speaker. We have much to do when the people of St. Lucia call upon us to right the wrongs of this administration. Our first task will be to stabilize the economy by restructuring the country's debts, so as to allow us for some fiscal space, so that we can provide income support for displaced workers, and we can place more money in the hands of those who who need it. We'll address the inefficiencies in the country's revenue collection agencies, and will immediately get the arms of government working in the interest of all the people and not some of the people. I pledge, Mr. Speaker, that an SLP government will remove income tax on any person earning less than $4,000 per month. So that means that from grade 10 in the civil service will pay no tax under the St. Lucia Labour Party. The St. Lucia Labour Party will remove the $1.50 excise tax on fuel for fishers in this country. The St. Lucia Labour Party will remove all facility fees in schools in St. Lucia to make education free. The St. Lucia Labour Party will remove CXC fees for mathematics and English. And the St. Lucia Labour Party will remove property tax on the people of St. Lucia. The St. Lucia Labour Party will complete the St. Jude Hospital construction within the immediate future, and the St. Lucia Labour Party will complete the process for the establishment of universal health care. From 2016, this government has spoken about a health insurance. From 2016, every document says health insurance. Every year, Mr. Speaker. When we were in government, we started the process of universal health care by eliminating people with high blood pressure and diabetes from paying for medication. So we started universal health care in this country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our road back to recovery will be challenging. We will require the energy of all of us, each according to their gifts. While we must be prepared, Mr. Speaker, to focus on the future, we must never turn a blind eye to the damage that has been done to our country. The people will have to account for their misdeeds. And everyone will have to face the law if they ever misappropriated the funds of the people of St. Lucia. Everyone, anyone who breaks the law will have to pay. Equal opportunity as far as the law is concerned, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the St. Lucia Labour Party that I have the honor to lead wants to reassure St. Lucia that our country needs caring leadership. And only people who care can provide that leadership. I, Philip Joseph Pierre, am a proud product of St. Lucia. I was born and nurtured in St. Lucia. My mother was a teacher and my father was a policeman. They provided profit to country. They provided service to country, not service for profit. I have been attacked by Father, Son, and Josie Ghost. I have been attacked by Father, Son, and Josie Ghost. I have been attacked on the way I look. I have been attacked on the way I speak. I have been attacked on every possible way. But I am a proud black man, proud of himself, comfortable in his skin, and I will, Mr. Speaker, I will, with the support of the people of St. Lucia, one day be the Prime Minister of St. Lucia. I expect, Mr. Speaker, these attacks to be intensified. I'm born and bred in St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. I expect the surrogates to attack me even more bitterly, Mr. Speaker. But St. Lucia is home to me. I've lived nowhere else in my life, and I will live nowhere else. I will live in St. Lucia, Mr. Speaker. I have an interest in seeing St. Lucia do better. I have one passport. I have one citizenship. That's all I have. I have nowhere to go. I have to stay in this country. Mr. Speaker, I promise to guide St. Lucia with compassion and not indifference, with what is right and not what is convenient, with humility and not arrogance, by example and not edicts. I promise to be a servant leader to all the people of St. Lucia and always to put people first, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I end, Mr. Speaker, with a quote from Proverbs 11 to 14. The integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.